They looked me in the eyes and said they regret having me. Not because I did something wrong, but because I wasn't their golden child. Hi, I'm Leora. I spent 28 years trying to be enough for a family that edited me out of their lives like I was a typo in their legacy. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Like love had conditions you never signed up for? Tell me, what would you do if the people who raised you erased you? Let's rewind to the moment everything started to unravel. The cheers echoed across the courtyard, bright tassels flying through the air like tiny fragments of confetti-colored joy. Everywhere I looked, families clutched each other, crying, laughing, taking photos on polished phones. 1,000 tiny reunions bloomed around me, but none with my name on them. I stood in my cap and gown, holding a paper program that had started to curl from the grip of my fingers. "They're not coming, are they?" I asked Jasmine over the phone earlier. She had gone quiet before admitting, gently, "Leora, they posted a beach pic this morning. Maldives." I laughed back then. I don't laugh now. I took a deep breath and walked toward the information booth near the edge of the quad. A woman in a blue blazer looked up, smiling. "Name?" "Kensington. Randall or Clarice." She typed for a few seconds, her smile dimming. "I'm sorry. No one under that name checked in." I tried to swallow the lump rising in my throat. "Maybe they came through a different entrance?" She glanced at me, kind but unmoved. "Possibly, but usually, guests RSVP under the graduate's last name." I nodded, forced a tight smile, and backed away before my voice cracked. Even the guest list had noticed. A classmate passed by, her mom holding her bouquet so she could hug her dad with both arms. I stepped back slightly, trying not to be in the frame of their photo. My eyes flicked toward the lawn where visitors stood in clusters, scanning every familiar figure in a desperate loop. Nothing. No Clarice's precise posture, no Randall's signature cufflinks glinting in the sun, no Avery's voice carrying over the crowd. I was solo. Again. Dean Moore appeared beside me like mist through grief. "You're Leora Kensington?" he asked, soft but direct. I nodded before I could think of a lie. "I saw your exhibit, the one in April. That final piece? The one with the chair?" He paused. "Stays with you." "Thank you," I said, too stunned to form anything better. He glanced around, then pulled a silver-edged card from his jacket. "Mr. Cross is hiring creatives. Serious ones. I think you should talk to him." My fingers closed around the card. Cross and Company bold serif lettering. Heavy. Expensive. I should have been happy. I should have felt discovered. Instead, shame bloomed behind my ribs like smoke. I nodded my thanks and stood perfectly still until he walked away. I didn't want to look at my phone, but I did. There it was. A new photo from Avery. Her in a white sun hat, Clarice holding a cocktail, Randall reclining near a private shoreline. The caption, "Recharge mode with my ride or dies, cheer family first." The tears came silently, not because they forgot me, but because I realized they didn't. I left early. No photos, no stage pictures, no champagne toast. Just me, my heels clicking against the pavement, and a business card that weighed more than my diploma. The rhythm of my steps echoed across the sidewalk as I walked back to the car. A sudden flash of memory hit. 10 years earlier, high school graduation. I stood in a cheap polyester gown while everyone around me posed with flowers. I told my friends my parents were caught in traffic. Then I told them they sent flowers. The truth was, they just didn't come. I smiled in every photo that day anyway. When I got back to the house, everything was quiet. Clarice's prized peonies lined the walkway, perfect and aloof. Inside, nothing had changed, except one thing, the photo wall. I froze mid-step, heart suddenly thudding in my throat. The center panel was a gallery of family pride: Avery's promotion party, Randall's award dinner, Clarice at a charity gala. The spot where my graduation photo used to hang was gone. Not just replaced, scrubbed. A paler square remained, framed by faint dust and memory. I stepped closer, needing to be wrong. But I wasn't. They hadn't just forgotten today. They had erased me yesterday. I didn't scream. I didn't confront. I walked upstairs, sat on the bed I used to sleep in, and stared at the scarf my mother gave me 5 years ago, still folded in my tote. They always said I was dramatic. But nothing about silence was dramatic. It was just sharp. Later that evening, I opened the fridge. On the top shelf were the blueberry scones I had baked the night before, hoping they'd be warm by the time I handed them over at brunch. No one had taken them from me. No one even said thank you. I took one, bit into it. Still warm. Still sweet. Still mine. My phone buzzed. A missed call from Jasmine. One unread text. Saw your face on Midvale's IG Live. You looked strong. You okay? I didn't reply. But for the first time that day, I let myself breathe. Just one long, quiet breath that belonged only to me. I returned to the Kensington house the following Sunday, box of pastries in hand, and the scarf Clarice gave me years ago draped over my shoulder like a peace treaty I never signed. The house looked exactly the same: surgical white trim, the glossy blue shutters that hadn't peeled in a decade, and that ever-perfect lawn that had somehow grown more symmetrical. What had changed, though, was me. The drive over had been quiet. No music. Just the hum of tires against well-paved roads. I had rehearsed 3 different greetings in my head. Hi, Mom. No, too stiff. It's good to see you. False. How was the Maldives? Too sharp. I settled on silence. It always seemed to be the language we shared best. The air inside smelled like citrus and money. And silence. For a second, I wondered if I should have called first. Then I remembered. They never did. Clarice greeted me with a quick glance from the sunroom. She didn't get up. Randall sat at the dining table, tablet in hand, fingers swiping like he was leading a quarterly shareholder meeting. Avery's voice rang from the kitchen, full, performative, made for echo. Leora, she said, barely looking. You made it. How was the traffic? No mention of graduation, no apology, just brunch. I walked to the dining table and placed the pastries at the far end. No one reached for them. I brought blueberry scones, I said gently, my voice already rehearsed for dismissal. No response. Avery was laughing at her own joke. Clarice sipped her tea like it was poisoned by my presence. I sat quietly, eyes flicking between them, trying to find a sliver of invitation. None came. I had an exhibit last week, I offered. The downtown gallery, over 200 people came. Clarice looked at me, eyebrows delicately arched. You've always been, how do I say it, performative. Even as a child, you didn't need a stage, just attention. That one landed like glass in my throat. I smiled through it. I thought you might want to know, I said. Randall finally looked up. If we're being honest, we shouldn't have had a 3rd child. We weren't ready. There it was. Executed with boardroom precision. My hand tensed around the napkin. Avery didn't flinch. Clarice didn't blink. I stood up. My chair scraped like a protest. I need some air. The hallway felt dimmer than I remembered. My feet moved without instruction, taking me to the family photo wall, like muscle memory from childhood. I wish they hadn't. Photos lined the space in a proud, curated arc. Avery's wedding in Vermont, her husband holding their baby. Randall and Clarice at the lake house, smiling like aging movie stars. Even old shots of my brother Ethan at his science fair. Everyone was framed, remembered, celebrated. But not me. Not even the one from my high school graduation. The one where Randall's arm had draped around my shoulder. Awkward, but present. Gone. There was a faint, square-shaped void. Dust marked where I used to be. Have you ever discovered that the people who raised you also try to erase you? That kind of silence that's not innocent, but chosen. If you've ever been kept in the dark by those who should have protected you, leave a comment number 7 below. Now, let's see what happened next. I reached out, touched the spot like I was identifying a missing person. My knees weakened. I steadied myself against the wall. My throat burned, but I refused the tears. They didn't deserve them. I walked out. The air outside was cold but kind. The pastries in my tote remained untouched. Driving back to my apartment, I kept the radio off. Silence had become an old friend. Uncomfortable, but familiar. I passed 4 intersections without noticing the lights. I unlocked my door, dropped the scarf on the hook, and stared at the empty peg beside it. I didn't cry. I didn't call Jasmine. I didn't even sit. I just walked to my dresser, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the thing I swore I wouldn't touch again. My red diary. I hadn't opened it in years, maybe a decade. The spine was cracked, the pages yellowed. I flipped through childish loops of ink until I landed on a line written in purple. Someday I'll matter enough for them to regret nothing. The sentence hit harder than I wanted to admit. A memory surfaced uninvited. Kindergarten art day. We were told to draw our families. I had drawn Clarice in a bright green dress. She looked at it and frowned, then said, "You always make things too vivid." Life's not that colorful, Leora. I looked down at the sentence again, then closed the diary gently. On a whim, I opened my laptop and pulled up the thank you email from the gallery manager. Her words were kind, effusive, proud. For a moment, I hovered over the forward button. I even typed Clarice's email. Wrote, "In case you're curious." I stared at it for a full minute. Then I hit delete. She wouldn't read it. And I didn't need her to. The morning after the brunch, I didn't get out of bed right away. I stared at the ceiling, the cheap popcorn texture blurring in and out as sunlight slanted through half-closed blinds. The apartment felt unusually quiet, the kind that settles after a storm no one else remembers. Eventually, I sat up, pulled the red diary into my lap, and reread the line I couldn't forget. "Someday I'll matter enough for them to regret nothing." I said it out loud once, just to hear it break the silence. Then I stood, got dressed without thought, and drove to the storage unit on Hennepin. My fingers were shaking as I turned the key and pulled up the metal door. The scent of dust and long-forgotten cardboard rushed to meet me. Box after box. Tax property old, paint supplies, Lakeview. Until I found it. A manila envelope, dog-eared and faded, scrawled across the front in my own handwriting from nearly a decade ago. Cabin contribution docs. I dropped to my knees on the cold concrete and opened it. Receipts, scanned emails, and finally, there it was. A signed, notarized letter dated March 4th, 2014. Subject: contribution of $43,000 toward Lakeview property acquisition. My name, my parents' signatures, official seal. I clutched it to my chest like a relic. That was the year after I sold my first big piece. I had just started painting full-time. They told me the cabin was in danger of foreclosure. I didn't even blink. I transferred the money and showed up with groceries and folding chairs and hope. I remember Clarice hugging me in the driveway, whispering, "You'll always have a home here." What a goddamn lie. I drove straight from storage to my apartment and called Gordon Halley, my late uncle's lawyer friend. He picked up on the third ring, his voice like sand and leather. "Gordon speaking. This is Leora Kensington. I'm not sure if you remember me." "Leora," he interrupted gently. "Of course I do. Your uncle adored you. I had to bite the inside of my cheek. I was wondering, I said, steadying my voice. Do you still have a copy of the 2012 Lakeview contribution letter I signed? He went quiet for a moment. I could hear the rustling of papers. Then, yes. March 4th, 2012. Contribution of $43,000. Notarized. Signed by you and both your parents. I closed my eyes. Thank you, but I was removed from the trust. No one told me. Another pause. This one heavier. I'm sorry to tell you this, he said, but the trust was amended in 2021. I handled the notarization myself. It was signed while you were hospitalized, after the accident. The room shifted sideways. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. What? You weren't there, obviously, he continued slowly. But I was told you had given prior consent. Clarice said you were briefed. I wasn't, I said. I didn't think so, Gordon replied. It felt off. After we hung up, I sat on the kitchen floor, staring at the envelope like it might combust if I blinked too long. They changed the trust while I had IVs in my arms, while I was unconscious, while I couldn't say no. And they never told me. I wasn't removed. I was erased. By design. The cold linoleum pressed against my legs as I leaned back against the lower cabinets, blinking slowly. My mind drifted, uninvited, to those days in the hospital. White walls, humming monitors, a nurse whose name I never caught adjusting tubes and checking numbers. Clarice never came. Randall never called. Avery sent no flowers. There was only one card, handwritten from Jasmine. It said, "You still matter, even if they don't act like it." It was taped to the plastic pitcher by my bedside. I pulled myself up, numb but moving, and opened my laptop. I typed Lakeview in my inbox search bar, and dozens of files popped up. Among them was a message from Randall dated 2016. You've always been the stable one, Leora. The emotional backbone when we needed it. We couldn't have handled things without you. I stared at it like a ghost had whispered in my ear. Emotional backbone. The same people who had leaned on me now called me too fragile to trust. Later that night, I pulled out an old file folder labeled Lakeview History. Photos of the cabin, of the renovation, of the deck I had helped rebuild with my bare hands. I stared at one from 2015. Me, sunburned and grinning, holding a can of white paint. Clarice smiling beside me like she hadn't already made a decision to cut me out 3 years later. I laid the photo beside a blank sheet of paper. Out of instinct, I started sketching. A family tree. Randall and Clarice at the top. A line to Avery. A line to Ethan. And then, me. I hesitated. Then drew a dashed outline around my name, like I'd been erased and penciled back in by a ghost's reluctant hand. Eventually, I opened the diary again and added a new line beneath the purple one. They didn't just forget me, they rewrote the story without me. And now I was going to write myself back in. I didn't make an appointment. I didn't need one. This wasn't a visit. It was an audit. The house looked exactly like it always did. Curated, sterile, self-satisfied, a museum of appearances. I wore a navy blouse, black slacks, no jewelry, no softness. I carried only one thing, a folder with the weight of 10 years in it. Just before I stepped up to the door, I had called Jasmine. She didn't say hello, just, "You sure about this?" I looked at the front steps, the door I used to sneak through in high school, the brass knob that had never changed. "They drafted me out," I whispered. "I'm just redlining the edits." Clarice opened the door, surprised but not enough. She masked it too quickly. "Leora," she said, like I'd dropped by to return a borrowed dish. Behind her, Avery leaned against the staircase banister with a mug in hand. "Look who's here," she smiled, eyes sharp. I stepped inside. No tea. No small talk. I'm not here for performance. Randall's voice floated from the kitchen. Coffee, Leora? He asked, without looking up. I ignored him. Placed the folder on the dining table. We need to talk. Formally. Clarice sat, composed. Randall finally joined us, still holding his phone. Avery hovered like a stage manager behind the curtain, waiting for her cue. I opened the folder. This is the notarized letter from 2014, $43,000, transferred directly from my account, with both of your signatures. Clarice blinked slowly. Randall exhaled like he was trying to make a negotiation disappear. Avery scoffed. We've been through this, Avery said. You overreact. That money wasn't a binding promise. It was a gift. You were unstable. After the accident, you weren't exactly reliable. I turned to her. You mean when I was unconscious in a hospital bed? That's when you changed the trust? Clarice's lips pressed tight. It was necessary. For who? For the family, Avery said quickly. We couldn't have everything fall apart because you were disconnected. I was in recovery. You rewrote legal history while I was learning how to walk again. Randall opened his mouth. Maybe we should have... Clarice cut in with a glance, a single sharp look that made his words vanish like steam. Number. You had to do what was easy, I said, voice calm but hard. I pulled out the next page. This is the trust amendment from 2021, executed without my knowledge. You listed Avery as sole trustee and inheritor. You removed me entirely. I'm the one who keeps things running, Avery said. You mean manipulated and monopolized, I replied. Randall stood like he might finally say something meaningful, but he didn't. Clarice shifted, her veneer cracking. What do you want, Leora? I looked at all of them. Acknowledgement, correction, mediation. We're not afraid of court, Avery snapped. You should be, I said. Because I'm done playing the quiet daughter. I laid the final document on the table. A copy of the original 2012 contribution letter, and a signed affidavit from Gordon Halley, confirming the timeline of my exclusion. This isn't revenge, I said, gathering my things. It's re-entry. I'm done watching you rewrite me. Have you ever been pushed aside, only to be needed later when it's convenient? That quiet ache when you realize you were never part of us, just part of the solution. If you understand that kind of hurt, leave a comment number 9 below. Now, let's see how it ends. Clarice looked stunned. Randall looked tired. Avery just looked annoyed. I walked out before any of them could find words. As I reached the car, I heard the door shut behind me with a soft, deliberate finality. I sat behind the wheel, exhaling slow. The adrenaline was still in my bloodstream, but now it felt warm instead of sharp. My phone lit up as I set it in the console. A message from Clarice. An old one, from 2020, still starred at the top. You're too sensitive. That's why we don't loop you into big decisions. I stared at it for a moment, then hit delete. Driving home, I didn't blast music. I didn't scream. I let the silence fill me like armor. That night, I stared at the ceiling and whispered one thing before sleep took me. Next, the world will hear. The invitation came on a Tuesday afternoon. Subject line, panel on invisible labor, Harmony Commons. I almost deleted it without reading it. But something about the sender's name, Allison from the nonprofit I used to work with, stopped me. She had remembered. She had written, "We know you've lived this. We'd be honored if you shared." I sat staring at the email for 5 minutes. My cursor hovered over decline. Then I clicked accept. The panel was scheduled for Thursday. By then, I'd gone over a dozen versions of what I might say. All of them sounded either too angry or too scared. I wanted to be neither. I wanted to be clear. That morning, I stood behind the podium in a modest conference room in downtown Minneapolis. Rows of folding chairs, weak coffee, a banner printed with compassion and wrinkled in the middle. There were no cameras, no sponsors. Just people who had lived through too much and were still standing. I took a breath. Hi, I'm Leora Kensington, artist, daughter. For most of my life, someone who tried very hard not to be a burden. A few heads nodded. One woman in the back folded her arms across her chest, listening harder. I used to think that if I was good, quiet, easy, helpful, that would be enough. That someone would see me and say, "She belongs." But invisible labor, I paused, isn't just about chores or paperwork. Sometimes it's erasing yourself for the comfort of others. I felt my voice steady. Not theatrical, just true. Invisibility can look like being left out of emails, like being told, "We thought you wouldn't care," like planning birthday parties you're never in the photos of, like funding someone else's dream because you believe in family, and finding out later they never planned to share the foundation. The room stayed silent, not cold, listening. Then I heard her, a voice behind me. "Hi," it said sweetly. "I'm Avery, her sister. I just wanted to offer some context." My spine tightened. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. "She's been under a lot of stress," Avery continued. "After her accident, things changed. We were all worried. I'm not saying she's unstable, just that it's complicated." She gave a perfect pause. "We all want what's best for the family, but sometimes memory doesn't match reality, especially when emotions run high." I turned slowly. She was polished, smiling, a blazer over her designer dress, press ready, performing. I nodded, then stepped back to the mic. "She's right." A murmur. "I did have a breakdown." "Do you know why?" I looked out across the room. "Because I spent 28 years being edited out of my own life." I reached into the folder and held up a single page. "This is an excerpt from my diary. My father read it 2 weeks ago and cried. For the first time in 28 years. I didn't read it aloud. I didn't need to. Some of us spend our lives shrinking, hoping that if we're small enough, polite enough, quiet enough, we'll finally be welcome to the table." I folded the page. But some tables were never set for us to begin with. There was silence, a kind that wasn't empty. Then a clap. Slow. Another. A murmur of hands joining. Someone whispered, "She said what we've all been too scared to." I stepped off stage before the applause swelled. I didn't need the sound. I needed the release. The next morning, my inbox was flooded. Messages from strangers, former classmates, a professor I hadn't heard from since undergrad. One message simply said, "You made me feel less alone." Buried under the others was one name I didn't expect. Arthur LaRue, my father's attorney. Subject: Something your father wanted you to have. I hesitated. Clicked. It was short. "He tried to speak with you before his bypass last year. He left this for you. If you're willing, I think it's time." A date. A time. Thursday, 10 a.m. When I arrived, Arthur didn't say much, just handed me a thick envelope. His eyes held something softer than pity. Inside was an addendum to my father's will, dated 11 months prior. At the top, handwritten in blue ink, to Leora, because I finally saw who really kept this family upright. I didn't cry. I exhaled. And for the first time, the breath didn't shake. There was more. Legal updates, a restored share of the trust. My name, no longer erased, but it was that line that eclipsed everything. That afternoon, I drove to the house. No folder, no fire, just the letter. When Clarice opened the door, her face was unreadable. Randall stood behind her. Neither of them spoke. I handed over the envelope. I just wanted you to know the truth wasn't lost. You just refused to read it. I turned to leave. Then I heard it. Leora. I looked back. Randall had collapsed onto the porch bench, shoulders shaking, the letter in his lap. Clarice sat in the hallway, arms crossed, but trembling. I didn't go back inside. I didn't need to. That night, I whispered into the silence. I wasn't wrong. I was just unseen. 3 weeks later, the wind off Lakeview carried the kind of quiet I used to think belonged only to other people. People with softer memories and simpler families. Now, I was learning that peace wasn't something you inherited. It was something you build. I had moved into the cabin permanently, the one Aunt Celia left behind. The one Clarice once told me was too isolated for someone like you. The one I helped pay for piece by piece, long before anyone admitted I had. I still remembered the first day I arrived. It was raining. Not hard, just steady. Like the kind of rain that rinses memory clean. The windows were clouded, the furniture covered in white sheets. The kitchen smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. I spent that entire day wiping every frame, every glass, every trace of someone else's history. And maybe my own. I painted the walls a warm clay color, something that felt rooted. The floors creaked when I walked, but they creaked for me now. I kept the furniture simple, the shelves clean, and above the fireplace, I hung 2 frames. One was a photo of me at 8 years old, holding a red notebook and smiling shyly at the camera. The ribbon in my hair was crooked. My cheeks were smudged with marker. She didn't know much yet, but she knew how to carry things quietly. Beside it, I framed the torn diary page, the one that used to make me cry, the one no one used to read. Now it sat beneath glass, not because it hurt me, but because it proved I existed. Some nights, I'd sit on the porch with cinnamon tea and nothing but the hum of the lake for company. Other nights, I'd write poems, scraps of memory, scenes I'd forgotten how to draw. One evening, Jasmine called. I picked up without even checking the screen. She didn't say hello, just asked softly, "So, how does peace feel?" I looked out at the trees swaying beyond the porch rail. "Quiet," I said, "but not empty." Then one afternoon, while sweeping the back porch, I found it, wedged under the last plank, barely visible. A red ribbon. Frayed. Familiar. I sat down on the step and turned it over in my palm. A laugh escaped before I knew it was there. That night I wrapped the ribbon around a new journal. Blank pages, a clean slate. I didn't label it Restart. I labeled it Forward. On Friday, I stood in front of a semicircle of teenagers at the local community center. My first creative writing class. The room smelled like dry erase markers and possibility. A girl named Mia raised her hand slowly. "Does it ever stop hurting?" I paused. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I finally did. "Not always," I said. "But it stops defining you." She nodded, and I saw something shift behind her eyes. A breath of belief. After class, she lingered behind. Slipped me a folded sheet of paper. When I opened it later that night, I read the words in loopy handwriting. I used to think I was just quiet, but now I think I'm brave. It hit me harder than I expected. Not because of what she said, but because she believed it. And maybe because I did too. Later that night, I read aloud the unsent letter I had written after the hospital, the one that began with "I forgive you," and ended with a sentence I had once buried under my breath for years. I just wanted to be enough. Then I lit a fire outside. The page curled fast. The ash rose slowly. No tears, no bitterness, just release. The next morning, I went walking by the water. I traced my fingers across the dock I'd helped rebuild. I sat on the edge and let the cold creep through the wood into my skin. I whispered, "They broke me." Then after a long breath, "But I rebuilt." Not to prove them wrong, but to remember I was right to begin with. Today, I live in a quiet lakeside cabin with clay-colored walls and a photo of my 8-year-old self above the fireplace. I no longer need to prove my worth to anyone. Dignity, peace, and presence are mine again, not because someone gave them back, but because I reclaimed them. What I've learned is this: when you finally stand up for yourself, you don't just reclaim your voice. You demand to be heard. No one gets to define your worth by silencing or erasing you. If you've ever felt pushed aside, lived in someone else's shadow, or stayed quiet to keep the peace while losing yourself, tell me your story. I read every comment, and if you're on a path of healing too, stay close. The next video will speak to women who chose to rise after being underestimated for too long.